and wanting to thank you all in advance for your interest in learning more about volunteer opportunities with AAPOR. AAPOR, of course, would not exist without the active and voluntary participation of its membership. We learned back during the conference a few weeks ago that more than 250 volunteers support the activities of our association, have supported us over the last 12 months, which tells you something about the commitment to service of the members of our community. Supporting AAPOR really supports our profession. It was also widely discussed during the annual conference that public opinion research faces an ever-changing variety of social and political, economic, and technological challenges, and AAPOR really depends on its volunteers to lead our efforts in confronting all of these. So volunteering to serve AAPOR helps support our profession in meeting some of its most important challenges. Of course, volunteering with AAPOR can also benefit your personal professional development. It's an opportunity to develop leadership skills, to greatly expand your professional networking opportunities, and it really also distinguishes you as a good citizen who's willing to devote time and energy for the common good. So again, thank you for your interest in doing that. So I'd like to turn over the discussion now to Gretchen, who will describe AAPOR's committee and subcommittee structure. Gretchen?
Thanks, Tim. So I'm going to start by talking about really the best way and the main way that people get involved with AAPOR, which is service on national committees. David will talk a little bit later about getting involved with your regional chapters. So right now we're just going to focus on the larger national area. We have a set of committees that really serve as the backbone of AAPOR's structure as an organization. And these are the groups of people that keep AAPOR running throughout the year and plan the annual conference. Each of these committees have a mandate that comes from our executive council that they continue to work on throughout the year. So these committees are led by a chair and an associate chair, and these are elected positions. So those of you that have been around for a while may have noticed that we do send out elections the beginning of the year generally, and we announce those just before the annual conference. And those committees then are divided into subcommittees, and those subcommittees work to address smaller goals within the committee's larger mandate. Committee members each serve a 3-year term with the option to serve a second 3-year term on that same committee. However, after 2 terms, members must rotate off that committee. They are not entirely kicked out of the committee service at this point. Members can move to another committee at that time. You just have to kind of mix up where you're giving your service. The time commitment also varies widely by committee. So if you're interested in serving on a committee, I encourage you to talk to the chair of the committee that you might be interested in to get a sense of time commitment. It may be that the committee does a lot of work during a particular part of the year, or that certain subcommittees within that committee are busier than others. Often chairs are willing to work with new volunteers to find a task that fits with your schedule. So make sure, don't be shy in talking to the chair or other folks on that committee about what may be required of you working on that committee. Most committees will assign a new volunteer to at least one subcommittee based on your interests as well as what the committee needs at that time. So if you're approached to join a committee, you may want to ask what subcommittees there are and discuss what you're interested in and where you might be of service with the committee chair before you take on that role. And this is also a great place to tie into that conversation about time commitment. So some examples, so the Communications Committee has our Social Media Subcommittee, and the Membership and Chapter Relations Committee, which I'm on, also has a Student and Early Career Engagement Subcommittee. Some committees have more subcommittees than others. So for example, the Education Committee has 6 subcommittees, one of which plans webinars and short courses and things like this. So you really can get a sense of where your interests lie and where you might be best to serve on AAPOR. So we have 2 kinds of committees currently as part of our organization. We have standing committees, and this is where the bulk of the daily business of AAPOR gets done. Right now we have 11 standing committees that I've got listed on the slide there for you. And then there are also ad hoc committees and task forces. Tim's going to talk more about these later. So if you are interested in the standing committees, we're going to talk exactly about how you might want to get on those committees and what you need to do to make yourself known to the committee chairs. You can join a standing committee at any time. First, the committee chair nominates their new volunteers, who are then vetted and approved by the Executive Council. Most committees really staff up around the time of the annual conference, and that does include right now. And this is when emerging needs for those committees become apparent for the next year and when members are rotating off committees at the end of their terms. The service on AAPOR committees, including those ad hoc committees and task forces, is limited to 2 concurrent appointments. So you want to be aware of that if you are approached by more than one committee chair to serve. Once a volunteer's nomination is approved by council, that begins their first 3-year term. You don't have to attend the annual conference to serve on a committee. Most committees will meet monthly by phone. There will be an in-person meeting at the annual conference for committee members who happen to be there, but it's not mandatory. So if you're concerned that you wouldn't be able to make the annual meeting every year, that you would be sitting on a committee, don't worry about that. A lot of the work that committees do is not dependent upon being at the annual conference. So once you join a committee, I also encourage you not to be passive. Volunteer for subcommittees and for particular tasks and work that interest you, and then make sure you follow through on that work. And this is really the best way to show others that you're serious about serving AAPOR as an organization, and it makes your committee appointment feel more like you're doing good work rather than just sitting on monthly calls and adding something to your resume. Being active and involved, like Tim said earlier, is both something that's beneficial for you as a professional as well as for AAPOR as an organization. So I am going to kick it back to Tim to talk more about those kind of special committees that we have on AAPOR as well.
Thanks, Gretchen. So in addition to our standing committees and their subcommittees that Gretchen described, AAPOR also periodically appoints both task forces and ad hoc committees. The ad hoc committees are intended to exist for relatively short periods of time while they're asked to work on specific problems. So usually, AAPOR's council is looking for expert advice on how to address an issue of importance. Right now, we have ad hoc committees working on several topics, and I think Gretchen listed a bunch of them, things like phone spamming, sugging and frugging, and false accusations against public opinion polls. The ideal ad hoc committee, at least from my perspective, is one that does its work and reports back to AAPOR's council with recommendations within 6 months of their appointment, within a relatively short time period. In contrast, task forces are really intended to do more deep dives into topics such as big data and survey non-response. And these will take more time to adequately investigate. So it's really understood that a task force will require more time to complete its work. As with ad hoc committees, members of a task force are generally appointed because they each bring a specific type of expertise to the group's work. The final reports issued by a task force are expected to be comprehensive documents that serve as a resource for all of AAPOR's diverse membership. And of course, you can find them all on our website. Both task forces and ad hoc committees are formed whenever AAPOR's council identifies an issue that requires expert examination and/or recommendations. Last year, 2 new task forces were appointed by the council. One that was dealt with mixed mode surveys, and that effort is now being led by Kristen Olson. And the other one will be dealing with quality issues in comparative survey research, and that will be led by Lars Leiberg and Beth Ellen Pinnell. 4 ad hoc committees were also appointed this last year. I mentioned 3 of them earlier, along with one that drafted an AAPOR Code of Personal Conduct. I think I mentioned also that members are selected for task forces and ad hoc committees based on expertise in the issues that the committee is going to be addressing. The appointment process for these, though, is identical to that for standing AAPOR committees and subcommittees that Gretchen mentioned, where issues of diversity and other committee service is always being considered as well. These committees and task forces are typically disbanded as soon as AAPOR's council accepts their final reports. And we, as I mentioned, we always try to get these posted on our website as soon as possible. So AAPOR's Executive Council is responsible for overseeing the day-to-day activities of our association, so it's very important. And the council does so in collaboration with our management company, Kellen, and I'll get back to Kellen in just a few minutes. So the council meets monthly throughout the year. There are several 1 to 2 day in-person meetings that are usually held each year in June, September, I think January and March, and also just before the annual conference in May each year. And during the other months of the year, 2-hour telephone conference calls are held. As you probably know, the council also holds an annual business meeting that all members are welcome to attend during the annual conference each year. These business meetings are an opportunity for members to meet with and ask questions of the council and to provide feedback on issues of importance to them. It's typically held the last full day of the conference late in the afternoon just before the annual awards banquet each year. So also regarding the council, elections are held once a year to place new members onto the council. And most council members serve 2-year terms, 1 year as an associate or apprentice chair, followed by a year as chair of one of our standing committees, such as education, membership and chapter relations, or standards. This process works pretty well as it provides new associate committee chairs with a year to learn the job before stepping into it. One important exception is service as president, which entails a 3-year commitment, 1 year as vice president / president-elect, 1 year as president, and then 1 year as past president. And we also have 2 counselors at large who each serve 2-year terms, and 1 new counselor at large is elected each year. So one of the key responsibilities of the past president is to chair the nominations committee, which works to put together a list of potential candidates for the following year's election. Typically, a minimum of 4 candidates are identified for each position, and they are all approached and asked if they would be willing to stand for election if they were nominated. And then this list of names for each position, rank ordered based on the committee's vetting, is then taken to the council during its January in-person meeting, and the council then selects which 2 candidates will stand for election for each open space on the council. And of course, then the election takes place usually March each year, so that the new council members can be seated at the time of our annual conference in May. Here's a list of the 17 positions on AAPOR's Executive Council. I'm sure you all are familiar with most of these. And Gretchen just has described a number of them. And just a word also, about our management company, Kellen. All AAPOR volunteers will come into contact with members of AAPOR staff who work for Kellen at one time or another. AAPOR has an annual contract with Kellen to oversee the management of our daily operations, and Kellen answers the phones, maintains our website, staffs our various committees, assists with conference and other meeting planning, and handles the vast array of details that really are necessary to make a large, modern, professional association operate. So we're very appreciative of them. Kellen staff working for AAPOR are based in a couple of locations. Kellen has a lot of offices around the country, I understand, but the AAPOR staff are based in Washington and in Chicago. If you volunteer for service with AAPOR, you're going to certainly come into contact with Kellen staff, as I mentioned. Okay, I'm now going to turn the presentation over to David Sterrett, who will talk about our regional AAPOR chapters. David?
Thanks, Tim. I appreciate it. So I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about the chapters, which are affiliated with AAPOR, but they're each their own unique organization. And the chapters are another great way to volunteer, to do professional service, and to meet people and learn a great deal. So first, just as an overview, there are 7 regional chapters that are affiliated with AAPOR. There's the Midwest chapter, MAPOR, the New England chapter, New England AAPOR, the New York chapter, the Pacific chapter, PAPOR, the Pennsylvania, New Jersey chapter, PANJAPOR, the Southern chapter, SAPOR, and then the Washington, D.C. chapter, which is DC AAPOR. So now, as I mentioned, each of these chapters are their own unique organization that has their own bylaws, but they work closely with AAPOR to try to advance mutual goals. So each chapter has its own set of members, and you can decide to join any of the chapters or all of the chapters, and you don't necessarily have to be an AAPOR member to join a chapter, and you don't necessarily need to be a member of a regional chapter to be part of AAPOR. And one important thing is that some people, you can also be part of multiple chapters if you want. It's not, I mean, each of them are regionally based, but some people are part of multiple chapters and travel around and do multiple events, and that's definitely okay. They each have their own membership dues and keep their own list, so you can be a part of as many chapters as you want. Like I mentioned, each chapter has its own set of elected officials and leaders, which is similar to kind of the AAPOR structure that Tim and Gretchen were talking about. And each also has a set of volunteer opportunities for people who are interested. I'm going to walk through kind of what each of the chapters, some of the highlights of each chapters, but in general I meant all of the chapters do a great job of, they hold a lot of events such as conferences, educational events, webinars, networking outings, and most of them have student paper competitions. So now I'm going to walk through a couple of the highlights of each of the chapters. Now just keep in mind these are just the highlights. I don't want the chapters do a lot of things, and I could do a couple slides about each chapter, but we try to kind of keep it concise and hit the highlights of some of the big events at each chapter that would be good to get a part of. So for AAPOR, the Midwest chapter, they do an annual conference in Chicago every year the weekend before Thanksgiving that has a lot of presentations and also includes some featured speakers. Similarly, the Southern chapter, SAPOR, does an annual conference in the Raleigh area every year in early October that has a lot of great speakers and presentations. AAPOR, the Pacific chapter, does an annual conference every year in early December in San Francisco. Good time to go to San Francisco. They also often do a mini conference in June, and they recently this spring did a short course in Los Angeles that was also available online. The New England chapter, which is kind of a regional chapter that spreads across a couple different states, they have multiple educational and networking events, and they've recently done stuff in locations such as in Boston and in the Connecticut area. A couple more. There's PAN-JPOR, the Pennsylvania-New Jersey chapter, and they usually try to do 2 events a year. They often do a fall-winter event at Princeton University and then a spring event at the University of Pennsylvania. The New York chapter, which is one of the larger regional chapters, they host a variety of different workshops, panels, presentations, and networking events throughout the year in New York City, and they're constantly doing events, as well as the DC chapter, DC AAPOR, which also has a lot of members in a small location and gets together quite often. They have a summer preview review conference. They do a POQ special issue conference most years. They have a holiday party, workshops, short courses, and they often have a couple of networking opportunities as well. Now, in addition to the chapters, there are some other ways you can get involved in AAPOR and meet people, and network, and one of those is affinity groups. And what affinity groups are they're voluntary associations of AAPOR members who want to share ideas, information, and experiences with other members with similar affinities or interests. This is a relatively new thing that's AAPOR implemented a few years ago. And right now there are 2 AAPOR affinity groups. There's the Cross-Cultural and Multilingual Research Affinity Group, and there's the Hispanic AAPOR. So a brief bit about each of those. So the Cross-Cultural and Multilingual Research Group says that their goal is to connect AAPOR researchers and leaders to facilitate a regular dialogue about improved methods, measurement, and research and publication opportunities. And now this is a group that's open to everyone. They often do a fun annual meeting or event at AAPOR conference every year, but as noted, you don't have to go to that event to be part of the affinity group. They have a website that I've linked to, and they also have a very creative motto that we can do it, we can do more together. Okay. And then moving on to the Hispanic AAPOR Affinity Group. Now this is for members who are of Hispanic origin or anyone who's interested in Hispanic research topics. The goal is to try to identify meaningful ways to increase Hispanic presence in the survey research field and raise the visibility of their members. In addition, like the other affinity group, they organize an annual meeting or a meetup at the AAPOR annual conference, and they welcome all people of all ages, genders, races, research fields, educational backgrounds. And again, they have a website that you can find on the AAPOR website, and you can reach out to them about participating. So And now if you are really interested, AAPOR members can form affinity groups around topics related to any professional interests or personal affinities, and anyone can propose an affinity group. What you need to do to create an affinity group is to submit an application to the AAPOR Council that includes the commitments from at least 10 AAPOR members who want to participate, and then it needs to state the group's purpose and the fundamental principles of the group's operations. I'm going to turn it over now to Gretchen to let you know a little bit more about how to volunteer.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the structure of AAPOR as a national organization and now about our individual regional chapters, but not how to actually get involved. The first step is letting committee chairs know that you're interested. And to do that, you can fill out a short form on AAPOR's website at any time. A lot of folks choose to do this when they renew their membership, but the link that's up on the slides is active at all times, so you can add that information whenever you'd like. When you fill out this form, there are some open-ended text boxes that give you space to explain why you're interested in a particular committee and why you would be a good fit for their work. Be specific when you answer those questions. If you have a particular skill set, so for example, a lot of your work may involve budgeting, make sure you put that in your form. Someone like the Finance Committee would always like to see folks that have skill sets that they can use. Or don't put that in if you're not interested in being snapped up by the Finance Committee. But the point is, the more specific you are, the better that you look to those committee chairs who are seeking particular skill sets or interested people. And the more easily we can match you with a committee that you will enjoy serving on. So this link is only for national level volunteers only, and since David just talked about our regional chapters, that is a great way to get involved and to get started as well. It's best to talk to your chapter officers directly because each chapter will have its own process for how people get brought in to their service as well. Okay. And now I'm going to give it back to Tim.
Oh, Gretchen, I think I'll jump in here really quick.
Oh,
and so, no problem. And so for the next steps, Gretchen just mentioned reaching out to your regional chapters. And so on these slides is a list of all the websites for each of the chapters, and they usually all have contact information on the chapter website, so you could reach out about volunteering and figuring out how you could become a member. And you can also, even if you aren't interested in volunteering or becoming a member, they often all have mailing lists that you could be a part of. They're kind of similar to AAPOR.net, but unique in each in their own way as far as keeping members updated. So that's one step, is you could reach out to the local chapter if you're interested. And then there's also always opportunities to seek out opportunities at the AAPOR annual conference if you go. What you could do is, one thing is you could look for the badges of various committee members. They wear those colorful badges that say what committee they're on, and you could walk up to them and talk to them about what they do on their committee and if you could get involved. And you also, as Tim mentioned early on, there's a lot of opportunities to volunteer at the AAPOR conference, being a moderator or helping out with the book booth or some of the other booths, and that's a great way to meet people and get involved. And as Tim mentioned, you also can attend the business meeting where there's a lot of discussion about how AAPOR works, and there's updates from each of the committees about what they've been up to in the following year. And lastly, I would just note that when you're at the AAPOR annual conference, there's usually a chapter reception the first night of the conference, and that's a great way to go up and meet people from your regional chapters and talk to them about getting involved. So if you guys now, I think we're about to start questions, but this last slide has the contact information for Tim, Gretchen, and I. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. And if you have any hard questions, make sure you reach out to Tim about them. Thanks so much.
So this is Liz again. Thank you, Tim, Gretchen, and David. And as David said, we now have time for questions. If you have any questions, please remember to submit them in the chat box at the lower left corner of your screen. We do have a few questions to get us started, and these first two seem to be related, so I'll read them together. One says, some members do not live in the USA, but we are happy to belong to this premier public opinion and survey research organization. Is it desirable or relevant for us to become involved in the committees and other organizational structures? Are there limitations on involvement by non-residents? And then similarly, another question said, hi, what about international Canadian? So I'm not sure who wants to take that one. Maybe Tim wants to jump in?
Yeah. Thank you, Liz. I'll be happy to take that one. And thank you both, Scott and Patricia, for those questions. AAPOR participation in AAPOR, along with membership in the association, is definitely open to our international colleagues. I would point out that the recipient of this year's AAPOR Distinguished Service Lifetime Achievement Award was a fellow from Stockholm, Sweden. We have many international members in AAPOR, and they are active in leading. Previously, many have served on council, certainly chaired task forces and other important committees within AAPOR structure. Obviously, travel's a little bit more of a challenge, particularly in these days. But so much committee work, for example, is done via telephone that that's not much of a barrier anymore. So really, I can't recall in my 25 plus years experience with AAPOR ever seeing membership as somebody within the United States versus elsewhere as being a barrier to participation, although some of you can probably think of some different examples. But we certainly welcome participation by our international members in all the volunteer efforts of the association.
This is Gretchen. I just want to add on to that, since our first two questions touched on this idea of international members being active in the organization. This might be a good opportunity for one of those affinity groups to form of international folks that are focused on being part of AAPOR as a bigger organization.
Great. Thanks, Tim and Gretchen. We have another question that says, can you speak more about the nomination process? What are you looking for in people who show an interest? And maybe David and or Gretchen could talk about this from a committee level, and maybe Tim could talk about it from the level of executive council nominations.
Sure. I guess
Sure.
I can start with that from the committee level at least, and then Tim can address it from the executive council level. We're really only making sure that two concurrent committees rule is being followed, so that we're leaving space for new people and not letting a handful of people rule across all of the committees. We also want to keep an eye on diversity. We don't have any hard and fast rules or strict quota about that, but we want to make sure that we are representing our membership adequately and accurately across all of our committees. So those are the things we look for when committee chairs bring in and say, hey, I want these folks to be added to my committee, and then we pass them up to the executive council. So I'll let Tim address that.
Thanks, Gretchen. For nominations to the executive council, I understand that there's a bit of mystery involved in how that process is done. I would direct you all to the AAPOR newsletter. I think it was April. Roger Tranjo, our past president at the time, was responsible for chairing the nominations committee this past year, and he wrote a really nice column in our newsletter that tried to make the nomination process as transparent as it possibly could be as to how names ultimately percolate up and are nominated to run for elections to serve on the executive council. In general, the kinds of things that I think the nominations committee are looking for, as Gretchen mentioned, diversity, that has to be considered. That's an important principle of our association. And that includes diversity in terms of a balance of AAPOR's various membership sectors, the public for-profit sector, the government sector, the not-for-profit sector, the academic sector, the news media sector. We want to make sure that there's a balance of representation on the council so that the voices from all of these groups within our association are represented. So that's a very important consideration. Another really critical consideration is past performance. The nominations committees, and I've never served on one, but my understanding is the past nominations committees, they're looking for people who get things done, that have already demonstrated their willingness to step up and volunteer to serve AAPOR, whether it be as a volunteer on various committees or through leadership positions in one of our regional chapters. It's certainly not unusual at all to see individuals nominated to serve on AAPOR's National Council after they have successfully served in the leadership capacity for one of the regional chapters. So that's another reason that stepping in to volunteer to work with your regional chapter is a really good idea, because in many ways it's kind of a gateway to involvement at the national level with the Executive Council.
Great, thank you for those answers. We have a few more questions that are also somewhat related, so I'll read a few together. One is pretty straightforward. To the best of your knowledge, which committees are most in need of volunteers now? And then another related question, if you are a new member of AAPOR, are there certain committees that are better to join than others? And then a third one I think is also related. Are there good opportunities for graduate students for volunteering and participating, and would it be the same steps of filling out the volunteer form you posted in an earlier slide? So I think Gretchen is probably in a good position to answer those.
Sure. Well, to the best of my knowledge, I don't know what committees are most in need of volunteers right now. I know that there are several, like the Education Committee, that held off on adding new members until after this webinar, so that folks that were interested could get their information in. So there are several committees that I know have openings. I'm not sure how many or what people might be looking for in terms of skill set. And I think that the question about if you're a new member and are there good opportunities for graduate students are very similar, right? Because as a graduate student, you're most likely a new member too. There are obviously some of our standing committees that aren't the best for new members and grad students, something like standards or standard definitions. You need a little more experience behind you for that sort of thing. But communications, education, membership and chapter relations, particularly for our graduate students, because we do have the new member and student engagement, or early career and student engagement subcommittee there. That subcommittee has also been doing more and more with new members of any career stage. So that would be a good place for new members who aren't graduate students as well.
And Gretchen, I would just add that especially for graduate students and new members, I'd say that the regional chapters are also, as Tim mentioned, a great opportunity. I meant there oftentimes it's a little closer from a travel perspective. The conference dues might be a little cheaper. And especially from a student perspective, there's almost all of the chapters have a student paper or poster competition that are a great way to get involved with the chapters and meet people and get to show your work.
Yeah, absolutely. And to become involved with the chapters, it's best to check out their individual websites and email listservs to figure out what their process is for getting involved and who you need to speak to. But for the national level, that volunteer form link I had up earlier is for everyone, regardless of if you're a student or working or what level of your career you're at.
And I would add to the list volunteering to support conference-related activities. During the annual conference, we really need a large number of volunteers. There are so many moving parts and activities taking place during the conference. It's sometimes a challenge to find enough volunteers to man all of the different activities that need support. So I would add that to the list that David and Gretchen have mentioned.
Great. We got another question that says, could you please talk more about the role of liaison in the committees? And I'm assuming that means liaison between the committees and the Executive Council, and maybe between the committees and the chapters. Does one of you want to take that on?
I'll be happy to take a stab at it. I think what we're talking about is just maintaining communications between various committees and also with the Executive Council in terms of what some of the activities are that are taking place. I know one example I can give is we have a diversity coordinating committee that was organized about 12 months ago. And there are liaisons from the diversity coordinating committee to most of, not all, of AAPOR's standing committees. Just to make sure that the voice and considerations of diversity in terms of committee activities is always recognized and remembered. And so they're kind of there to be the voice of diversity on those various committees. So that's probably the most concrete example of the regular activities of a liaison person on various committees that I can think of offhand.
And Tim, I would just add that also in regards to the chapters is that AAPOR as a subcommittee on the Membership and Chapter Relations Committee, there is an AAPOR subcommittee that works with the chapters to try to keep the chapters, everyone up to date on what each of the chapters are doing and what AAPOR is doing so that the chapters can coordinate and work together. And there's a quarterly call between all of the chapters and the AAPOR subcommittee to see if there's any issues or how the chapters can help each other out to advance mutual goals. And there's an email list between the chapters and everything so that everyone could stay in touch and make sure that, people are working together and not, learning from each other.
Great. We have one more question lined up, but just a reminder, if anyone else has a question, please type it in the chat box at the lower left-hand corner of your screen. The question we have on deck is, outside of this webinar, how do you communicate this comprehensive information about getting involved to new members and to existing members who are newly interested in getting involved?
Okay, I will be happy to take a first pass at answering that very important question. I'm not sure that historically we've done a particularly good job at communicating this information, and I think this webinar in and of itself is evidence that we're trying to change that culture and get the word out. Obviously, we'll have to work with our communications committee on a more comprehensive strategy, but we will now permanently, for the foreseeable future, have this free webinar available on our website, and hopefully we'll be able to make a direct link to it from our volunteer page, so that anybody that goes to our website looking for volunteer activities will be made aware that this webinar recording is available to them. And now that I think about it, we're certainly open to other good suggestions and ideas for getting the word out. Probably maybe when people first join up with AAPOR as part of the membership acknowledgement, we can also direct them to this webinar so that they can have an introduction both to our activities and our organizational structure, as well as opportunities to volunteer. But as I said, we're definitely open to other good suggestions as well.
Yeah, I would love to hear suggestions from the folks that are viewing this webinar, because getting this information to you is what we want to do. So I'm sure that you have a lot of good ideas about the best way to do that. Another thing to keep an eye out for in this coming year is that we are going to try to put out specialized calls for volunteers. So there are times when we need folks with a specific skill set, and we need to kind of reach out and say, hey, who can do this that's interested in serving on a committee? So we're going to be sending those out via AAPORnet at different points in the year, and along with those will be a reminder that, if this, you're not the person that this call is looking for, that's great. So here's another way you can volunteer by filling out this form and letting us know what you are interested in. So those will be coming out via AAPORnet as well.
Great. And Gretchen and Tim, you both mentioned you welcome suggestions. Is the best way to send those to email them directly to Gretchen, being the volunteer coordinator, or is there another good way for people to send their suggestions?
Sure, I say send them right to me, and I will get them to people that they need to get to.
Great. So I'm putting you on the spot by putting your email address back up on the screen.
Perfect.
We do have one more question. If we want to volunteer to help with tasks at the next conference, do we fill out the form to be a conference committee member, or can we volunteer to help without being on the committee?
You can volunteer to help without being on the committee. Ideally, the committee will know where to reach you. So I would say the best thing to do is to fill out that form, and in those open-ended text boxes, just let us know that you want to volunteer at the committee, but maybe don't have the time to serve on, or you want to volunteer at the conference, but maybe don't have the time to serve on the committee itself. That way, when the conference support committee, who organize all the really great things we do at the conference, like speed networking and our fun run and group dinners out, are looking for volunteers to work with them on those events, they will know to come to you.
With that, we have reached the end of our webinar. On behalf of AAPOR, I'd like to thank Tim, Gretchen, and David for sharing their wisdom and experience. And hopefully we've gotten a few folks excited about volunteering with AAPOR. We also thank all of those attending for your participation. Remember to watch for future AAPOR webinars, and don't forget to log into your AAPOR account to fill out an event evaluation in order to print your certificate of participation. Please complete the evaluation to help us serve your needs in the future. This concludes our program today. Have a great afternoon, everyone.